to create a new movement party, which is how I like to refer to it, we need to make sure that we don't fall into the trap of what the mainstream media does, which is reducing all politics to personalities. So I think in the early stages of your party, there was this whole thing of it's about Jeremy, it's about Zarah, it's about the two of them, it's about neither of them. That's the wrong way to approach it. I think that there were some issues around data, around money, around the nature of communications. I hope that those have been resolved. But I think it's extremely important that we don't let that divert us from what this new party should be. And in my opinion, this party is not just about creating another political party for people to go and sit in Westminster or in their local councils. It's about fundamentally changing the structures and functioning of British politics. And in order to do that, it has to be grassroots up. I think in addition to that, we have to avoid what I, as a former member of Parliament, describe as parliamentarianism, which I've experienced myself, which is when you're in a parliament, you think that that's the center of the universe. It's not. And unless we are able to create a new movement party that is democratic, transparent, and accountable, that brings together not only progressive elected representatives who are elected by their communities and responsible to those communities, but that we also ensure that there are permanent links between any representatives in Parliament, our communities, and our social movements. Unless there is that dynamic, it won't achieve what I think is what is needed, which is a profound and permanent change in the British political landscape. Democracy is not easy. Nobody has ever tried to do what this movement party is trying to do. The most difficult thing is the balance between leadership, which to some extent every organization needs, and the grassroots. I've experienced through the African National Congress in South Africa a movement transforming into a party of government. And it was fundamentally corrupted and captured in that process. The only way in which this difficult dynamic works is if there are rules and processes in the party from the beginning where the leadership cannot continue in leadership unless they remain, first of all, transparent. Because unless they're transparent about what's going on, nobody at the grassroots will know, because we can't rely on the mainstream media to tell us. Second of all, accountable. So I happen to believe that elected representatives should come from our communities, that they should serve those communities, and I believe there's no greater honor than serving one's community, and then return to their community. I don't believe in professional politicians, even though I was an MP for 7.5 years. And I think unless every single person, including in the leadership, including anybody who stands for political office on behalf of this movement party, is willing to sign up to a pledge to the membership, broadly in the party, to the local community, as someone standing for electoral office, it won't work. So I think that is the crucial mechanism that you use to create a movement party that has the leadership it requires, but that remains accountable to the grassroots. And we have seen versions of this that have been successful. The one that I cite, which obviously is not a direct comparison because there are differences, is the Belgian Workers' Party, where the party will not contest in an area electorally unless it has been present in that area for a considerable period of time, one. Where anybody seeking electoral office has to sign up to this code, if you will. And third of all, where people who achieve electoral office have to ensure that some of what they get paid, because people in electoral offices in the EU and the UK get well paid, that some of what they get paid comes back to the movement party, so that they're not seeking office for the material rewards, for the status, or for power. Because unless we break that link, we will not succeed in creating a movement party. It'll just be a normal political party. And the thing that reminds me of how this works for the people who are in office is as follows. Nelson Mandela once walked into our parliamentary caucus in the South African parliament. And he said to us, now that you're all MPs, who here thinks that you're important? And of course, a whole lot of people put up their hands. And he said, the moment you think you're more important than the people who put you here, the people you serve, the people who pay your salary, is the moment at which you are of no value to that community, you're of no value to this movement, to this parliament, or to this country. And I think that is the ethos we have to create in our elected representatives, so long as we live under liberal representative democracy. I think the biggest challenge facing us is for everyone to understand that Parliament isn't the centre of the universe, that it is one site of struggle, but that we have to combine this struggle for greater equality, for a fairer society, for a Britain that plays a responsible role in the world in terms of its climate responsibilities, in terms of its responsibility to foster peace around the world, rather than be an active participant in the genocide as it currently is. Everybody has to realize this isn't about them. It's not about any individuals. It's about all of us. And I think that is a major mind shift. It's a mind shift not just for people in leadership, and I was for a time part of a leadership group, the organizing committee, but also for people involved in the local initiatives that have sprung up as a consequence, to realize that they don't just have the right to, they have the responsibility and duty to hold any and all leaders to account. I think the other issue that we're going to face is that those ranged against us, who are the entire establishment, which runs probably politically from the Lib Dems all the way through to Reform and everything in between. We know what the mainstream media is like. They played a critical role in bringing down Jeremy, in preventing Jeremy as Labour leader from winning the 2017 election. And I think we're going to have to be prepared for that to happen again. And how we respond to it this time is, first of all, by ensuring we have enough of our own alternative media in place that people are using effectively. And secondly, that when an individual or individuals or the movement party as a whole gets attacked, we go onto the front foot and we make clear what the root of those attacks are. So, for instance, when Jeremy, the most anti-racist politician this parliament has seen in decades, was described as a racist and an anti-Semite, starting no less than with Margaret Hodge, whose family business made fortunes out of the apartheid state in South Africa. When Jeremy was called a racist and an anti-Semite, and if that happens again, which it's likely to, we need to all stand up as one and say, this is a total nonsense. Look at the number of Jews, in their tens of thousands, who are incredibly supportive of Jeremy in Britain, in their hundreds of thousands around the world. And the root of this attack is a right-wing and far right-wing ideology that is attempting to hide behind the pretense of being anti-racist. They're nothing of the sort. And we need to make that clear. We must not try and accommodate these people. There is no accommodating them. The very people who describe us on the left as anti-Semitic have themselves a far longer history of anti-Semitism in the first instance, and secondly, have been active participants in a genocide that is based on racist white supremacy. For this movement party to be a huge success, it needs to be broad. It needs to appeal to people broadly. The reality is, even if one looks at the working class in this country, in Britain, many people who are part of the working class, or part of what, for instance, the writer Dan Evans describes as the petty bourgeoisie, the new petty bourgeoisie, don't see themselves as part of the working class necessarily. I'm not sure that it's instructive to label ourselves as many things that we will be. We will be socialist. We will believe in far greater equality. We will be anti-militarist. Many of us will be anti-Zionist, but some might be non-Zionists. And I don't think we should start off at the beginning by excluding people on the basis of labels. I think we should make absolutely clear what we stand for in a set of principles and values and ultimately policies. But I don't think we should say to people, unless you identify as A, B, or C, you have no place in this movement party. Because the one thing that social movements like Stop the War, like the pro-Palestine movement that we've seen over the last couple of years grow extraordinarily in Britain, is that it brings together an extraordinarily broad range of people. And that is something that I think is important. The reality is, in Britain today, we have a political system that is unsustainable. We have more billionaires than at any time in our history, while at the same time we have more families having to use food banks to feed themselves since at any time since the end of the Second World War. In addition to which, we're an active participant in the world's first live-screen genocide. We have the most unpopular Prime Minister in the history of opinion polls in this country, who happens to be my Member of Parliament. This would be totally unsustainable without far greater authoritarianism and repression of protest and dissent. And that is what we've seen. For those of us who've lived under Keir Starmer as IMP for over 10 years, we know that his every instinct is anti-democratic and authoritarian. The rest of Britain is now experiencing that. So we now have people who are opposed to a genocide being described as terrorists. I think the term is far better used for those who are perpetrating a genocide rather than those who oppose it. And that includes our own government. So anybody who has been arrested, convicted, and or jailed under this repressive anti-protest legislation should obviously be freed forthwith and should have their sentences annulled and removed from legal record. It is an absolute travesty of justice, a cliche that is entirely appropriate in this context, that these people should ever have been arrested, let alone be serving time in jail. And people like the Filton 24, who are predominantly a group of committed young activists who are committed to the cause of a sustainable climate, who are committed to the cause of Palestine, who are committed to anti-militarism. For them to be spending years in jail seriously asks questions about whether Britain is still a democratic state in which one is allowed freedom of expression, freedom of political thought, and freedom of protest. The fact that immigration police undertook raids in Camden, the borough in which I live, quite recently, the fact that we are seeing more and more racist rhetoric from the government, believing that it is somehow going to appeal to potential reform voters, without realizing that some people who vote for reform want the real thing. And Nigel Farage is, as one of his teachers described him at school, a nasty little racist. I don't believe that all reform supporters are. I believe a lot of them are just absolutely desperate because of the conditions in our country, and they want an anti-establishment change. Unfortunately, they believe that Starmer and his multi-millionaire pals are in any way a part of the solution, whereas in fact, they're a major part of the problem. We have to communicate with people about that. And the best way to do that is actually through engaging with people person to person. The way in which this racist rhetoric and these racist practices manifest is raids. And we are going to see more and more of them in our communities as the remarkably unpopular Labour government gets more and more desperate. How do we respond? We have to respond with anger. We have to respond peacefully. And we have seen communities respond to some of these raids where they've made it impossible for people to be taken away by immigration authorities. That is a form of direct action. And I am a great proponent of direct action. So I think we have to express our anger at this rhetoric and these raids, but we also have to peacefully, as communities, try and protect those in our communities who are being targeted. I don't fully understand the process of sortition, and a lot of the views pro or against it are based on the fact that we haven't been given any details of actually how it will work. And this has been a problem in the early days of this movement party, is that the communication has simply not been good enough. If it is a random process of electing people, the concern that I have is local groups have sprung up all over the country. Like in Camden, we have something called the Camden People's Alliance. And there are dozens and dozens of similar groups all over the UK. How do we ensure that those local initiatives are represented at conference? Because if you simply use a random balloting system, you could have 10 people from an area in the UK and no people from 4 or 5 other areas. Whereas if you do have a process of representation, you can ensure that where communities have organized themselves and are ready to make meaningful inputs to the future of the movement party, which is what the launch conference is about, then there should be some way for those people to be represented. So perhaps there needs to be some sort of a split process between some sort of random selection of individuals, but then also space for all of the local groups to be appropriately and democratically represented in this process. So I don't think I have the silver bullet, But I don't think a pure process of sortition is necessarily the answer. There has been inadequate information from those driving the process. There should obviously be a process whereby local community-based organizations that bring together the breadth of progressive organizations and individuals operating in a locality should be told exactly what their options are in terms of their relationship with the new movement party and how they go about concretizing or formalizing that. I would imagine the alternatives would include simply becoming a local branch of your party, and then we'd need to know what was entailed in that. But in addition, I mean, Jeremy has spoken throughout the process of some sort of federal arrangement. So I assume there is also the option of just affiliating with your party. So retaining a local identity, but being an affiliate of your party, which could imply being a local representative as well. So we need to understand how these things are going to work in practice and what the mechanics of doing that are. To be honest with you, I don't have a clue at this point.
Do you know how assemblies fits into all of this?
So all I can tell you is what I've sort of picked up, because you need to understand my role. So I was on what was called the organizing committee. And then when there was a difference about whether we should have single leadership or co-leadership, the organizing committee was then disbanded. So since then, which has been a few months now, I have not played any role short of, I am still, for my sins, signatory of the bank account to which donations were made in the various iterations of people signing up. And we're in the process of transferring those monies, the bank account, and everything else associated with it, to your party limited, which has now been registered. So I can tell you a lot about the finances. I can tell you very little about any of the mechanics, processes, or structures, because I'm not aware of anything that is in the public domain about those things.
Do you think the model of France and Senegalese is something that should be studied?
So I think that the sort of coalition of left forces that we have seen in France, that did incredibly well in the last French elections, stopped real-life fascists from taking power effectively, has lessons for us. Obviously, the political system in France is different, the political structures and processes are different, and we have to be cognizant of that. France is a different political society to Britain. But I think where we can learn is how groups who don't agree on everything have come together and have presented, to a large extent, not exclusively, but to a large extent, have presented a united face publicly. So where the French movement has been successful is in bringing together different generations of French activists. Mélenchon has been a leader of the left in the public eye for a long, long time now. And I think the fact that he continues to play a leadership role is a good thing. But at the same time, you have Rima Hassan, who is a much younger public representative, who comes from a very different background. She's of Palestinian origin, who comes from social movements. And I think that combination has been incredibly effective in capturing the imagination in France. And I want to reiterate the other point that I think we can learn from the French. And that is the way in which they have brought together a broad coalition. They don't agree on everything. There are some quite big differences. But they are focusing on what unites them rather than what divides them. And I think we on the left in this country can learn from that experience as well. I think the other thing that is interesting about the French experience of this united left front that has come together to fight fascism and has been quite successful in doing so is that they have hundreds, if not thousands, of local organizations of varying size across the country affiliated to them. And that ensures that they don't lose that movement edge to what they're trying to do. And I believe we need to do the same in Britain, which is why I refer to us as a movement party rather than just as a political party. And their experience of that in France is instructive for us. The idea of a movement party means that you have local organizing at the grassroots. And what that local organizing is doing is identifying and trying to address the issues that communities have in localities. For instance, in Camden, where I'm based, housing is a huge issue. It's of crisis dimensions, in my opinion. What we should be able to do, and what has been done successfully in France, is feed up the issues that we are having on the ground and feed them into the structures of the movement party so that actual lived experience can inform our policy positions. And then, when it comes time for elections, we can say to communities, well, we've been working with you on these issues for all these years. We have had to try and address these issues without having access to state power. In this election, we are going to contest state power because we have some left-wing councillors in the Camden Council. We have one currently. If we had half a dozen, we would be a much more important voice in what the council actually does in relation to housing. Additionally, if we had dozens of progressive MPs in Parliament who were all arguing for the same thing, it would be a much louder voice than the half dozen who sit there today. And it's this way of linking community issues with electoral politics that enables us to do two crucial things in combination in order to change the face of British politics. We take back the streets. We say to Keir Starmer's government, we're not going to be told what we can and can't protest about. We're not going to be told about how we should and shouldn't protest. The streets are ours. And at the same time, we need to be challenging for and taking positions in what I call the palaces of power. Our councils, our regional structures, in Wales and Scotland, the devolved parliaments, and obviously Westminster. And it is by having power on the streets and in the palaces of power that we can fundamentally change British politics if the people who represent this new movement party are committed to being accountable to the grassroots. We have an example in Camden of how this could work. And there are examples in many parts of the country. There's great organising in Liverpool, in Southport, in Preston, in Newcastle, in many parts of London, and all over the country. But let me use the example of Camden because that's where I live and what I know best. Very important to the creation of the Camden People's Alliance has been the Camden Friends of Palestine, the local PSC, and various other Palestinian solidarity organizations. And people raise the question, well, what does Gaza have to do with the local council and local issues? And it's very easy for us to explain. The fact that our councils are not getting enough money from central government, the fact that our council are constantly putting up charges, the fact that both the national and the local government are not investing sufficiently in what is needed in a borough like Camden and in boroughs all over the country, is because every year that Keir Starmer has been in power, and the Tories were no different, we have seen massive increases in defence spending. In 2027, the increase in defence spending will total £15.4 billion. And the stated intention of government is to increase that increase even further from 2030. This is the money that we as taxpayers pay to the government. It's not the government's money, it's our money. And huge amounts of that money is being paid to subsidize our defense companies like BAE Systems, Kinetic, Rolls-Royce, and even Elbit Systems Limited, which is at the heart of Israel's genocidal war machine. So that money, our defense budget, a lot of it goes into those companies. That is money that should be going into our communities. That is money that should be going into social and council housing, into the NHS, into our education system, into benefits which have been cut to the bone by this and previous Tory governments, because this is simply a red Tory government. So the relationship between our involvement in Gaza as a country, where we continue to provide weapons, to provide bombs and missiles, we continue to provide intelligence, we continue to provide training for Israeli military personnel with our money. That should not be happening. The vast majority of people in this country want that money spent on the crises that we're all facing at a local level and spent on the biggest threat to all of us, which is the climate crisis. So that is how we link those two things. And that's how we did it during my campaign against Keir Starmer in the last general election, where we managed to reduce his own personal vote by 50%. Because many people who had never heard of me, who got used to having Keir Starmer as an MP, suddenly realized, hang on, we've been taken for a bit of a ride here. And our solidarity with the Palestinian people, with the incredibly courageous, resilient people of Gaza, is actually linked to our solidarity with all our communities on the ground who are suffering to get through life day to day because of the massive cuts of this government, the massive increases in the cost of living, all of which could have been avoided if we spent less on what they call defense, but which is actually war making.